There are a lot of jobs within the bike industry, and Alex, well, he might have one of the coolest in my opinion. So thank you guys for joining us for another episode of our Bikes MBS video podcast. People have said that they would think we should make a podcast for a really long time, and as someone who doesn't consume a ton of podcasts, I've just thought, like, do people want to listen to another podcast? I don't really know. However, I'm lucky enough to travel and talk to a ton of people that have really amazing backgrounds and really cool stories working in the bike industry, developing products. And oftentimes only 1 or 2 minutes of an interview gets used in our videos. And sometimes we just have specific conversations for what I'm hoping this podcast can turn into. So Alex has worked for Fox now for quite a few years, and he actually is part of their custom tune and development team. He works out of an office they have down in Arizona, which probably a lot of people don't even know Fox has an office in Arizona. But one of his responsibilities is working with certain brands to help develop shock tunes for bikes. All brands have different desired feels, kinematics, and goals with their bikes. And his job is essentially to be the go-between for Fox and that brand, develop, test, and review tunes with those brands, their testers, etc. And as you'll see in this conversation, he has some really amazing bits of information on setting your rebound, as well as just other fun stories from helping test, develop, and create some of the tunes on bikes that most of you have probably ridden and had a great time out there. So stay tuned, guys. This is a really fun episode. Well, I don't know how much fun it is listening to two bike nerds geek out, but hopefully it'll be informational and entertaining in some way. If you guys would like to see more conversations like this, other people that you would like us to get in touch with, please let us know down below. Of course, we like having these conversations ourselves, but we would like to make videos that you enjoy watching or podcasts that you enjoy listening to. So yeah, throw some names out down below. Let us know if you like these type of videos or content, and we'll keep working on more. Thanks very much, guys. Enjoy the episode. Okay, so Alex, thank you for sitting down with us, man. Tell me, what is your official title and, more importantly, your role at Fox?
Yeah, so I'm part of the engineering team. My title is engineering tech, and we work with the project performance team, which is like part of it. The big part of it is to do the OEM tuning. So we do camps with the brands to tune the shocks to the kinematic frame. Now we do a little more with the forks also, so they can pick what they decide to spec on their bike. So the end customer buying a bike will have a shock that we work on specifically for that bike, and sometimes the fork also.
Okay. How long have you been in the bike industry?
So probably 30 years now.
Oh, wow.
If you start from the beginning, I guess, when I was involved, I was like racing and everything, managed a bike shop, I was racing myself, and then involved with Fox for a long time, and I'm officially in that position for 3 years now.
Okay. And you are not at the Scotts Valley, California office. You work out of a different office in Arizona, correct?
Yeah, so we have an office based in Scottsdale now that have a little engineering team that I'm part of, and then some CSR, customer service. We have a service center now. And it's an addition to have more spread into the team. So we have an office in Asheville in North Carolina, then in Vancouver in Canada, and then the Scotts Valley.
Okay.
So the product performance team, we're only 7 or 8, I believe. But we have at least one person in each location, which spreads the testing and the tuning into all different sort of terrain. So we all learn from each other on each terrain. Sometimes we share data, and somebody develop a tune in the Northwest, and I try it in the desert and see if it go across or not. Because when we work for the OEM, it has to work for everybody. So I think it's a good strength to the team, and the addition of Scottsdale was a good one.
Okay. And so obviously, I mean, you said the shock, right? A brand has to develop a shock that works for everybody. And I think we all know, right? Whether it's tires or geometry, it's impossible to make something that works for everybody, but we can certainly try to, or I should say, you guys can certainly try to make something that works for the most amount of people
Yep.
in the bell curve, I guess, so to speak, right? So when you're working with either your own team or a brand to develop a shock tune, what are some of the hurdles or challenges? Like, I could imagine sometimes there's a tug, like, I think we're sacrificing some performance here, and they're like, it doesn't matter, we need it to do this. Like, how does that work?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that, and then also, you know, if we're here with Pivot, so as an example, I work with Pivot a lot because of the location, and Chris, the owner, is very involved with what he wants to do on the bikes. So, like for this specific bike, is a good example to use. I worked with another guy in the Scotts Valley office. We both had the bike. We both were tuning the same shocks. We both came with different tunes. We were cross-matching each other. So he would try mine, I would try his, and then kind of make a decision on what to introduce to Chris. And then I would go on a test ride with Chris, and he could pick and decide what he likes, what he didn't like, and try to explain why or where he wanted to go. And so after, I think about 3 times that we met, so a lot of different tunes. He chose one that he really liked that was matching what he wanted for that bike.
Okay.
And so I would say what's difficult as far as somebody like us tuning is to take yourself out of the equation. It's not for yourself. It's not for whatever you like to ride. It's really for the brand and for the bike. So it needs obviously to match that the bike is working well. But yeah, like I would say for this specific example, there's one that actually my colleague from Scotts Valley came up with that we both liked the most. But for Chris, it was a little bit too racy, I would say.
Okay.
And so he went to something he thought was more adaptive for the
General
for the
public,
end
or
customer.
okay. And so it's interesting then, someone from Scotts Valley who's probably riding Santa Cruz most often, and you guys had a tune that you guys both agreed was the best one for that bike?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We cross-matched a couple of times, few adjustments, but as far as like how it worked for him in the steeper stuff and more smooth, I was able to make it work also on the desert and more sensitive and plush. So.
Okay, nice. And I think it's worth noting that you're an extremely awesome shredder on a bike. I imagine that your coworker is also a top tier rider as well.
Yeah.
So like you said, right, you got to remove yourself from the equation. So while you guys maybe thought that was a better tune for your level of riding, you probably also agreed that for the general rider, it maybe wasn't the best?
Yeah, definitely. So Chris had me with a shock that he already really liked for that bike. And so to me, that was the baseline. And one of the things I was doing every time I was doing test laps was to redo a lap with that shock to remind myself, this is what he wants. So like every time you can get lost a little bit of like, this one's better than this one and this one's better than this one. But then the baseline was back to that shock every time. And when we both liked that tune, when I baselined it back to the shock for Chris, it was definitely different.
Okay. And then when you guys do like the camps with a brand, for example, how many employees come out? Do athletes come out or not so much, because they're pretty irrelevant to the consumer?
It depends. Yeah, the race is kind of a different department, and everybody knows Jordy at this point, and he's more involved with the race. So they have their own camp. It happens once in a while that an athlete is here, like you've experienced here. Morgan Shaw was here, and I helped her out a little bit. And then now you saw all of the trails. We have been coming here pretty often with the brands, especially the European brands. And so it's just lap after lap of repetitions to do the same trails, the same lines. Again, take yourself out of your equation. You're not trying to be the fastest at that trail. You have to do it at the same time 10 times a day to isolate what all of the options are. And
okay. So can you tell us what are your testing parameters? How do you validate, maybe what you feel or think versus what the clock says, or is the clock always the most important thing? Like, what do you guys?
No,
How do you test?
we
How
don't.
many shocks do you
We
test?
really don't use shock, especially clock. Sorry, especially not for OEM. It's more feeling, and then a lot of the time, the brand brings their own test guy, or the product manager, or anybody that they trust enough to be involved into choosing.
Okay.
And so we just kind of get together and they ride, we ride. A lot of the time, I'm the rider. So compared to some of my colleagues that are more into the tuning and the machines and the analyzing and doing a lot of stuff on the computer, I'm very involved with the riding, with my past and my experience with that. So I'm always with the riders, and we ride the same stuff and the same bikes a lot of the time. And so we can kind of cross match the feelings, and then based on what they request, we can make the changes. And the advantage to be on the trail with that person is to see how they ride and what they're doing. And so if they complain about something or something is really wrong, sometimes it could be also a user error, if you want to call it that way. So it's good to have somebody on the field to do that. And then, yeah, we'll just make changes if it's necessary.
So how many, like at one of those events, how many shocks do you have? And then how many runs do you do before you change a shock or rebuild it with a different tune? Or
Usually, I'd say for one bike, we can probably have 3 or 4 shocks. So we have more tunes that are already prepped, and then go through those. We have a way to have pretty accurate data ahead of time. So those brands are sharing a lot of the kinematics and all of the numbers, a lot more precise than what you could see on the media news. So we can input all of this and make a choice and use tunes from our library first. And then if the tunes from our library that should potentially ride well with those kinematics don't work, then we start going more custom.
okay.
But the goal is kind of to keep it in the library and see if the adjustment are enough. Yeah, so.
Okay. And then as kind of talking about like different shocks, right? There's people who will buy a bike, maybe they don't like the shock, right? They don't like the brand or whatever it is, and then they go to a Jensen, right, for example, and they just buy a shock that's on sale, or they buy like, oh, I'd rather have this shock or that shock. What do you think about people who just go out and buy an off-the-shelf shock?
Yeah, a lot of the time there's things they're gonna have a better performance for a reason or another, but most likely they won't.
Okay.
Especially in nowadays, I would say the past 3 or 4 years, the brands have very been working with the suspension brands, whether it's us or the competition. So if you buy a bike that is spec a certain way, is likely gonna have, at least for the shock, a tune that's for that bike. So when you buy a shock off the shelf from a distributor, it has sort of a medium everything
Okay.
to fit most, but it won't be necessarily as good as it could get.
Okay. So obviously that's not going to stop people who want to buy a different shock for their bike, right? Is there a way that consumers can get a custom tune a shock that they buy that is the one they want?
Yeah, so for us, if they stay within the brand, so let's say they have a Floatex on their bike, that was on an OEM bike, and they decide they want to buy an X2, they can communicate, this is my bike, this is the Floatex that I have. I think there's an extra charge for it, but they can get the tune that we do offer to that brand.
Okay.
Because basically once it's in our system that this specific bike, so here it's a Pivot Firebird, in our system it's gonna say that the X2 with Pivot Firebird has this tune with all the details, so you could purchase that.
A shock that's more closely tuned for that bike. Okay.
Yeah, that would be exactly tuned for that bike.
Yeah. Okay.
The same one that Pivot would buy from us, basically.
Now, we've talked a bit about moto,
Yeah.
and I know you're also a big dirt bike rider. In the dirt bike space, there are so many suspension outfitters, right? They customize and tune, and almost everybody who buys a dirt
the first
bike,
thing you do. Yeah.
you get the suspension tuned. What are your thoughts about that trend not taking place in the mountain bike industry?
I know. I think it's just it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of money to have a team. You asked earlier how many people we are. I would say on a camp like this for a whole week, we would probably be between 4 and 6 staff-wise. So to get the money worth it, to do that to the end customer, it would involve a lot of money on our side. And I think like the amount of money we would need to charge somebody to come to do one of those camps as an end customer would be
Sure.
probably too much for people to afford.
Right.
And I think it's difficult. The moto has a lot more volume. Everything is bigger. You know, the weight is not as involved as is in the bike, and I think it makes our job a little more difficult because it's a little more sensitive. So I think just the base weight of a rider is difficult to make a tune that might work for that rider. So it could be a heavy rider that rides really hard. It could be a heavy rider that sits on his saddle a lot. You know, it could be a really light rider that rides really fast. And so like those conditions are just really hard to take in consideration without being with that person.
Right.
And I think it would be difficult to do it by mail
Okay.
to make it efficient, in my opinion.
And what about like independent suspension tuners, kind of also like there are in the moto industry, right? Like you can fill out a form. I know there are several suspension service centers and people who do offer tunes. Do you think that those folks do a good service and maybe more people should look into doing that?
Possibly. I'm not super aware of it, to be honest. I know a few of the brands that are offering this. I have not talked to anybody that actually has done it.
Okay.
I know Push does custom tuning based on weight and bike.
Okay.
But I believe they have maybe like 4 or 5 tunes and they pick between those.
Sure.
So like, even though it's custom tuned from buying off the shelves, I don't see it as a custom tune like we would be doing for.
If it was like a proper training and testing camp.
Yeah.
Okay. For riders who maybe struggle sometimes with suspension setup, maybe they get a new bike, for example, and they're just not driving with it. Maybe they think it's the shock. Maybe it is the shock, right? Being not tuned properly. Do you have any advice or insight as to like, what's a common thing that you see when you're watching bikes go through rock gardens, right? Like you watched all of us come through and ride, and sometimes you would offer up like, hey, even if we didn't say something, you said, let me just try something.
Right.
What would you say to the consumer is something you see all the time?
Yeah, I mean, number one is balance front and back and do your sag. There's multiple conversation of how you should do sag. The most consistently you can do it yourself, I would say that's the best way. And just start with this. Like, your suspension needs to hold your weight, and that's the spring rate, whether it's a coil or it's air. That's the number one. If this is wrong, the bike's likely not gonna feel very good. So I would say put the shock and the fork in the middle of the adjusters, compression and rebound, do your sag. You choose, I would say modern bikes is 20 to 30% front and rear, and then go from there. Yeah, if the sag is wrong, the balance off front and back is wrong. So you could feel like your fork is really stiff and doesn't work, but it's probably because the rear is too soft, or vice versa. I mean, whether it's us or the competition, there's a lot of time, a lot of engineering into those products. Like, there is no reason you cannot make that product work for yourself.
Okay. And I heard you say a few times some thoughts about rebound.
Yes.
Do you want to share what those are from you?
Yeah, I would say the rebound, open it, and it's not too fast until it's too fast. So the more rebound, the better, until you feel like it's really too fast, then close back up. But
okay. What would you say is too fast? Like, how is a rider going to know, oh, that's too fast?
Yeah, bouncing
other
off.
Than jumping something.
Yeah, like hitting a compression and really bounce off. Or like an easy test is you sit on your bike and you hit like a couple inch size bump, and if it really bounces you hard, the fork is pretty pretty easy to find when it really comes back hard, and you can feel it in the bars and jerking you. But yeah, the more open, the more the wheel can stick to the ground and come back after an event. Obviously, it matters with weight and all of that, but
Okay.
for a person, I would say it's never too fast until it's too fast.
Yeah, which I've definitely found too fast a few times before
Right.
in my riding experience. But
Yeah, so just bracketing, opening more and more and more until you do get those wrong event, and then go back 1 or 2 clicks and you're
okay,
good.
okay, awesome, man. And then yeah, over your years of working in the bike industry, any stories, thoughts, advice that you have, whether it's someone who wants to work in the bike field or someone who wants to maybe optimize their suspension tune?
Yeah, I don't know, just ride your bike.
Ride your bike.
Yeah, ride your bike, be informed. And yeah, bike shop experience definitely teaches a lot. You can see what's in the world and what people are doing, and then yeah, if you have the opportunity to go in a company, it's always good. Whether you're even packing the bikes or doing whatever, you'll be involved in the company. You can talk to people. You'll meet people that love riding bikes, and yeah, I think that's the main thing. I never made a pass for myself, and it just kind of made itself because I just kept riding.
Right on, man. Well, thank you. Appreciate all the advice and help tuning the bikes, and
Yeah.
thanks for sitting down and chatting with us. So thank you guys very much for joining. If you have any thoughts, questions, or you'd like to ask some more questions about suspension setup, we'll reach out and try to get an answer. So thanks again, man. We'll see you hopefully on some more trails soon.